Welcome everybody. My name is Nick Nichol. I'm a Director of the South Australia Office of the National Archives of Australia here in Adelaide. I'm also a member of, at least for one more day, of the local organising committee for this conference. So it's been a pleasure working on this conference and it's a pleasure to chair this morning's session. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the land that we meet on today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we've got 4 lightning talks this morning. It's a short session, we've got a lot to go through. We've got speakers from the UK, Australia, New Zealand and China, all focusing in different ways on the design or redesign of user experience and collection management. So I'll keep my remarks brief and we'll make sure we get some time for some questions at the end, hopefully. So speakers, I'm going to introduce you one by one and invite you to the stage. And then at the end, we might all come up here and take questions. So first up is Catherine Elliott. Catherine leads the Digital Services Department of the National Archives UK. Digital services are responsible for providing access to the collection online, helping the public find their way through the archive, and amongst other things, for developing an experience which engages people with that collection through contextually rich content. Catherine has worked in the digital space for more than 15 years, focusing on creating quality, user-oriented digital experiences across a diverse range of industries and markets, including telecommunications, health and beauty retail, commercial ports, broadcast media and music across the UK, Europe, Asia and Australia. So please welcome Catherine to the stage.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. I'm Australian, but live in London and have been there for 18 years or something now. And disclaimer, I'm not an archivist. I know about digital. I'm 2 years into learning about archives, so I know a little bit more than I did a couple of years ago, but rapidly increasing my learning. I'm going to be telling you a bit about Project Alpha, which is a major project that we're kicking off at the moment at the National Archives. 10 minutes isn't enough to delve into it in detail, so it'll be fairly surface level. If you have any questions, obviously at the end of this session, but grab me anytime, whether it be in person or virtually after this conference. Okay, so just as an overview, Project Alpha is an opportunity to explore what we would create if we were to start completely anew with the National Archives website, which the primary part of that, the most important part of that, is our online collection. I'm going to be going into the background and context about this a bit more. Essentially, we're going to be starting from scratch from a technical point of view and from the point of view of designing all of our user journeys. The project's going to run until the end of March, which is the end of our financial year, so it's a compressed period of time, and it's an alpha. We're not taking something live as such, but it will be run in the open and a website, a prototype that people can interact with, and any of you guys can interact with. And we're working with a technical partner to challenge us and co-create it with us. Despite the fact that we do have an in-house development team, it was important for us to bring in fresh perspectives into this process. So why Project Alpha? Our legacy systems are like many of other archive systems. They have been around for some time. They were fit for purpose when they were first built, but now really not, and really get in the way of us developing the front-end experience and really pushing forward with what we want to do. They also lead to really constrained thinking of my team in particular, because they've had like a decade of people telling them, oh, no, you can't do that, or that's going to take a long time. So that really gets in the way of innovation and creative thought. So it was important that we took a new approach with this. Again, we're not unique in this respect. We have a number of instances of silos. So our catalogue and our website are entirely separate, and never the two shall meet, which gets in the way of us creating an integrated experience, which is what we really want to do. But also our teams were siloed, so we had separate teams responsible for the catalogue versus the collection, which leads to some interesting siloed thinking, which is not helpful either. This is representing our users. We leave them pretty baffled. Again, I know we're not alone in this, but archives can be inherently complex and not intuitive. We probably baffle them more than we should. Well, we definitely baffle them more than we should. We could make some things much easier. We could communicate to people much better what archives are about, the structure that they have, and support them more in understanding that and learning that over time. So there's a lot that we need to improve in that area. We have low satisfaction rates for our first-time users and for family historians. We have higher satisfaction rates for academics and professional researchers, but mainly that's because they have a clearer mental model of how archives are structured. But also importantly, they've learnt tricks over years of working with our systems. They know how to get around the weaknesses of them. They're experts in that. But that's not what we want. We would prefer that we built a system that catered for all needs effectively. That's a big challenge, but yeah, much more effectively than we do now, so that people don't need to work around the system to get what they need. So what is Project Alpha? We're taking a blank sheet of paper approach. We want to ensure that people aren't constrained by the technical limitations that we've got now. If we assumed that we need to incrementally improve from where we are now, it will really restrain people's thinking. We won't make the sort of step change and ambitious plans that we feel we really need to make. So we're assuming that there are no technical limitations as part of this. I'll talk in a bit about some of the limitations that we will be carrying with us through this. We're taking inspiration from alpha.gov.uk, which, for those that don't know, was a live public prototype of gov.uk before it officially launched. So that was the bringing together of all of our government websites into one. And this is how we want to run it as well. We want to run things in the open, in front of the public, to invite the public into that and to co-create this new interactive prototype with the public and with our colleagues within the National Archives, but also the industry as well, and to invite input and feedback throughout the process. It's new. This is a new approach for us, but it's one that I really hope will become normal for us going forward. So just quickly, and this is going to be fairly quick run through, but in terms of what we're going to be focusing on, we want to ensure that we end up with as light a tech stack as possible. We don't want to be in this situation again in 5 years. So it's important that we set ourselves up technically to be flexible and adaptable going forward, because no matter what we come up with now, in terms of a front-end experience guaranteed in 5 years, it'll need to be different. It's important that we address whole lots of aspects of navigating the archive, so we need to make it easier for people to do the easy stuff, and where it's inherently hard, we need to support people much better in those stages. We want to create a more engaging experience of our collection online, and we believe that a way of doing that is to bring evidence, the record, and interpretive content, collection-related content together. We know that we're going to have to do that in a very careful way to ensure that we don't mess with the authenticity, trust, integrity associated with the record, because that's what we're about. But we believe that we can carefully do that using clear signposting and communicating source to have a layered approach of the evidence and related interpretive content. As I've mentioned, we're going to do this in a participatory, purpose-led way, engaging with the public of all sorts. And what I'm going to delve into in just a little bit more detail is data optimization, because in my view, this is the most fundamental part of this project and all that we're doing. If we can, and actually coming back to what I was mentioning before of one of the limitations that we do carry with us into this project is we travel with the data, the metadata associated with our records. We don't have the resources to improve, rewrite the descriptions of the 34 million records, so that comes with us, but we're in a good time right now with all the modern technology and approaches that we can put into place around optimizing that data. So don't worry too much about the detail here, but this is an illustration of the knowledge graph work that we're in the midst of working on at the moment. We're going to be using machine learning, starting with relatively kind of basic approaches to this of looking at natural language processing, entity recognition and topic modelling to draw out connections between different parts of the collection so that we can surface that to the public and help them navigate their way through the archive in new ways that we're not able to facilitate so well right now. But also look at how we can use this technology to draw some valuable metadata down the hierarchy, say from series level down to record level, where, for example, if you were to want to find a war diary, if you searched for war diary, that wouldn't actually present you with a war diary because that is in the series level description, not in the record description. So that there are things like that that we could relatively easily address and improve the data so that we have then a really strong foundation to build a vastly improved user experience upon that. So what does success look like? We have been talking about this being our North Star. It's something that brings to life, so this interactive prototype is going to bring to life our vision for where we see our digital services going. It needs to be ambitious. It can't be something that we can just achieve next year. It needs to be something that leads to a multi-year roadmap. It needs to be something that excites the public and importantly leaves them less baffled. I would suggest significantly less baffled than they are now, but that also it speaks to my colleagues and is something that they really want to see happen, and that senior leadership at the National Archives also want to get behind in terms of budget and resource, and that this becomes a set vision for us and defines our roadmaps and our priorities going forward. How am I for time? Oh, really? I spoke really fast then. Let me just... You what, sorry? No, I know, exactly. I'm just checking I've said everything else. So the one thing I will say actually just that I didn't note was in this, the important thing in terms of the linking
we'll wait till the end for any questions. Our next speaker is Zane Metcalfe. Zane is an early career archivist at the University of Newcastle, Australia, and a recipient of an ASA Sharman Award to attend this conference. He works in both a public interface capacity and in collating and preserving the history of the local region he lives in. Zane.
Hello everybody, excuse me, and welcome. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Kaurna people of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Just before I start, I'd like to give thanks to the Australian Society of Archivists. Without their financial support, I wouldn't be here to give this talk to you today. Sorry. Reading rooms are seldom a place of wonder and excitement. A reading room to me conjures up images of sterile white rooms, uncomfortable desks, and even more uncomfortable chairs, all in this awkward silence, only punctuated by the shuffling of papers. They are dreary, dull, and generally very uninspiring places for anybody to be in. For some people, I imagine that this is the goal, is the blank, sterile space for serious research to be conducted in. However, I feel like there's a very big problem with this approach. The general public's experience with archives is that of the reading room and precisely nowhere else. It is this impression that shapes the public's conception of us as being boring, esoteric, and mercilessly bureaucratic. Indeed, research conducted on the perceptions of archivists has not changed at all over the last century, especially when we compare to our sister profession of librarianship. Libraries have undergone a seismic shift in purpose and function in the last 20 years to adapt to the ongoing digital transition. Libraries have become much of a space as a repository for that information, and it is that space that underpins the value of libraries they have to the general public. When faced with the closure of libraries, the general public takes up arms to defend them. However, when an archive is threatened with the closure or savage budget cuts, the most often response is, "What's an archive?" As such, we need to strive to become as integral and as loved as libraries are in their wider communities. By reinventing by these public-facing spaces, we can direct the narrative of the public to show our importance and value of our collections. Of course, naturally, we are not libraries. We're not a public space where people spend their fond moments in reading their favorite books. What little interaction we have with the general public, we need to make it count. These public spaces need to be engaging, informative, welcoming, and valuable to our patrons. Archives must make the best possible first impression, and by fixing the design of reading rooms and front desks to demonstrate the value of archives to the public. So, how do we demonstrate this value? I believe it entirely relies on the quality of hospitality and service we can provide to the public. In an early review of writings about library hospitality, Johnson and Casma had this to say, and I will quote at length. In short, library staff, by the attitude that they show to patrons, could affect the patrons' attitudes towards libraries. These early writers recognized that welcoming, cheerful, and helpful, that is, hospitable behavior by library staff was paramount if the institution was to be successful in serving the public. The cost of failing to approach their work with this mindset is loss of patronage and, by extension, the failure of the library as an institution of service. There are benefits to this selfless behavior as the air of hospitality enhanced the position of the library in two ways. It led to a stronger relationship with the public, and this in turn became a better support for the institution as a whole. With archives, I feel it's easy to become blinkered in regards to the value of quality hospitality and service to the public. I feel that some archivists feel like guardians of these collections first and facilitators to those collections second. Under this hospitality as community engagement paradigm, this facilitation of our material allows us to be much more effective guardians by building a mutual rapport with our communities. In regards to what actually makes a space hospitable, there's no concrete definitions for hospitality. It's this nebulous mix of things like ambient services, amenities, and staff attitudes. Dewey of the Decimal System himself complained in 1886 of crabby librarians, poor indexes and finding aids, dim lighting, bad ventilation and heating, among many other things. Dewey's list, and this should be read, in my opinion, as the absolute bare minimum, and what we should be looking for in our archives is taking the experience from the adequate to the fantastic. With this in mind, so how do we elevate the user experience to demonstrate our value to our patrons? Of course, most archives run on very tight budgets, as I'm sure you're all very painfully aware, so I've taken that into account with the following suggestions. One of the most conspicuous aspects of archival research is the lack of ability to casually browse. In a library, it is the process of discovery that drives the most repeat visits. In an archive, the patron must know exactly what they're looking for in order to request it. Some catalogues will suggest related items, but this misses the visceral experience of finding something not entirely related, but still valuable and tangential to the person's research. In our own archive, the inclusion of general interest material in the reading room has had an incredible response. Most notably, folios of reproductions of pre-colonial and early colonial illustrations of Newcastle and the Hunter Valley have held the interest of every patron that has come in. As we're a regional archive focusing on a specific place, the inclusion of this generalist material of the early visual history was an obvious choice for us. Most importantly, the inclusion of these readily accessible files facilitate the process of discovery. The patrons pore over the maps, plans, charts, and lovely illustrations and find new avenues for their research. It is their own initiative and discovery that has proved so valuable to their own research and shown the value of our archive to their studies. To add to this, the physical copies of the finding aid should be made available wherever possible to facilitate this process. It is much easier to thumb through a physical catalogue and have something catch your eye in comparison of clicking through endless pages of search results. Naturally, many archives are far too large to be all-inclusive, so there's a need for prioritising your most popular collections in regard to these finding aids. For many of you, it would mean your birth, deaths, and marriage registers, but other popular topics could include your major industries and associations of your region, early histories and depictions, military history, queer history, or any kind of unusual or unique collections. Improving this casual accessibility drives discovery, and discovery is so often where archives are deficient. Because of the controlled nature of the collections, patrons have difficulty finding complementary material unless it is explicitly indexed with their search topic. There's an ongoing theme of patrons' requested documents only being the tip of the iceberg in regards to what is actually useful to them. Discovery and design of the reading rooms have to be hand in hand, and nothing makes a patron happier than finding what they want and then some. As I've mentioned, reading rooms are often very dreary affairs. As the reading room is the public's only physical point of contact with the archive and vice versa, it's important to show them our value. The reading room itself is an opportunity to be engaging by being evocative, as to that is where the public will be spending the vast majority of their time visiting. Our rare books and special collections on display in the reading room have never failed to draw the interest of visitors to the archive, both for first-time visitors and veterans alike. I often have students coming in not looking for anything, just wanting to show their friends what they've found in our cupboards and our archives. As these displays are directly within the reading room, patrons have the time to admire our display items while they wait for their archives to fetch their requested materials, as well as the browsable materials and finding aids. One of the most memorable things patrons recall about our archives is the sheer miscellany. In our lobby, there's a disco ball spinning above a set of lounges with a water fountain trickling in the background. In fact, if you Google our library the archives are held in, you will get a picture of our disco ball as the cover image. It's not the library, it's the archive disco ball that is the symbol of the library itself. We have a wide variety of material on display. We have displays from a queer history event to the oldest text in the university. There is a map of early white explorations of the Hunter Valley hanging on the wall, its unfamiliar cartography and orientation making it look like a map of a long-lost fantasy land. One of the effects this has on our patrons is displaying the sheer variety of documentation and artifacts available here. Archives have often great difficulty expressing the width, depth, and breadth of our collections and their attending value. It is in the reading room where you can show that variety and value. An archival collection is so often an eclectic assembly of materials. Why should your reading room be any different? In regards to the general ambience, as basic as it sounds, additions of greenery make a welcome additions in such a stark environment. Low maintenance terrariums and jarred aquatic plants are fantastic alternatives to potted plants like peace lilies and lucky bamboo you see in every office. I've had countless enthusiastic comments on the jar of plants sitting on my front desk, and of course the plants have to be taken care of, so I suggest nominating a plant parent, somebody who has a green thumb. So, even with all these things brightening up the archival experience, it's worth precisely nothing if it isn't backed with hospitable service. Archivists, as previously mentioned, have a very unfair stereotype of being grumpy, poorly dressed, and bureaucratic. Service to patrons must be consistently helpful and comprehensive in order to break free of this stereotype. Naturally, with archives so consistently understaffed as they are, this is perhaps the greatest challenge to accomplish. As it may be beyond the capacities of many archives to provide more in the way of face-to-face services, but providing a welcoming and non-intimidating front desk and reading room experience may encourage visitors to engage with archival staff in an early and an effective manner. Visitors may be impressed by collections, but they're always more pleased by good quality service and careful attention to their information needs. So the best way to encourage use of your archive is to make those first impressions count. Our community engagement is the golden key to making sure the public supports and values us as an institution, and to show our value, we must demonstrate that value. Introducing casual browsing, improving the reading room, and great service are inexpensive and effective ways of proving your value to the public at large, and hopefully creating some kind of image of the archive in the public memory. Thank you.
Thanks, Zane. Provocative, and I think we might come back with a few questions on that one. Our next speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Nichol. Elizabeth worked firstly in the library sector and more recently with tertiary education records and archives.
Hello everybody. I'm a university archivist, and not surprisingly I find the archives in my collection fascinating. But even I have to admit that some others consider the archives to be filled only with very worthy but rather unexciting records. Yes, they tell the story of the institution and record all the critical decisions, academic requirements and results, but very few manage to capture a sense of what it must have been like to be taught at the university at any particular point of time from the perspective of a student. Today's talk is really me just thinking out loud about some of the context and issues involved if we, in our archive, were to start collecting more material which would document the student view. In her 2004 paper, Ellen Swain described university archives as being made up of three main types of material: official university records, records created by students for course requirements, and records created by students outside the classroom. She went on to discuss the need for more collection of archives to document student life outside the classroom, such as students' associations, clubs and special interest groups. And I believe that many university archives are now addressing this gap, attempting to capture a sense of the wide and varied nature of student life and experience. But it seems to me there's still one area which is too often missing from the design of our university archives, and that is actual examples of student academic work and how the students responded to the teaching they received in the various academic disciplines taught by the university. Our archives are very well served with their collections of governance minutes, academic program details, academic results, strategic plans, annual reports. But these records only tell the story from a governance or management perspective. Most of these strategic documents emphasise our core roles of research, teaching and learning. Many of us have also undertaken and documented analyses of the student journey. We are exhorted to consider the student experience, acknowledge the student as a key stakeholder, and we're constantly reminded that without our students, our universities would not exist. Also give us a deeper insight into the effectiveness and practical implications of all those policies, learning strategies and changes to delivery and assessment criteria that take place. Our experience as archivists tell us that the material which many of our researchers get most excited about are those which give some sort of window into the people who make up our institutions. And by that I don't mean their personal lives, but something which brings to life the way in which they contributed or interacted with the university. Something which gives them personality and which breathes a real sense of what lies behind the formal archival record. Being able to see examples of student work will surely aid this. When thinking about this issue, I did a little bit of digging to see if this was just an issue facing Australasian universities or something common across the world. I found some wonderful examples of where student work was being collected, such as Princeton's School of Architecture student work collection, the Music Performance collection at Eastern Washington University, and the Architecture Studio Archive at the University of Sydney. So some universities are actively collecting this material and have come up with some workable solutions to the challenges that come with it. I'm not naive or idealistic enough to think that changing your archive's design to encapsulate some of this material will not be without major challenges. We can't and won't want to collect everything, so need clear principles to determine what examples we keep. There'll be issues around intellectual property and copyright, around cultural or commercial restrictions and access. How often should we include exemplars from the same academic discipline or even the same class? I don't know, but we could ask our academic staff or note when there are significant changes to our learning delivery models. Should we rely on donations or some other acquisition method? What would we do with formats that don't neatly fit into our limited archival spaces or which we don't have the tools to preserve them? Again, I don't know. And maybe it would be enough to have a 2 or 3D representation rather than the original. But surely these issues need to be addressed rather than the whole material type put in the too hard basket. Alongside this gap in student learning archives is whether and how much we should routinely collect examples of teaching resources. Not the teaching notes of a particular academic, but the resources that are used to support the lesson plan, such as slides, sound recordings, films, diagrams, scientific equipment and specimens. As with archives, there tends to be a period when these aren't considered interesting, but just old and out of date. Very old examples may be kept as heritage items, but the middle-aged just tends to be discarded, risking a real gap in forthcoming years. Which brings me to the intersection of archives and museums and where that happens in universities and other organisations, but that's another topic for another time. I should have preceded this talk with a disclaimer that the opinions being expressed are very much my personal opinion and not the opinion of my university. Indeed, we're still working through the relevance and practical issues in collecting exemplars of student work, including whether it is part of the role of the university archive or the teaching departments somewhere else or indeed nowhere at all. And I should close by acknowledging that yes, we do sometimes collect examples of academic work in the personal papers of alumni or illustrious academics. But what I hope you might go away and think about is whether those of us working in the archives of academic institutions need to tweak our collection design just a little bit more to include more exemplars of the actual learning experiences of the tens of thousands of students who were part of our universities, so that we can preserve an even richer and more complete picture of the life of the university. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And our final speaker is Shi Yuxing. Shi Yuxing is a junior at Wuhan University in Hubei province in China. Her major is archive science. As a sophomore, she joined in a student research project which is related to smart archives and became the team leader. Last year, she joined the Chinese publicity team of the ICA and was responsible for sending articles from the official WeChat ICA account. So far, she has participated in editing 14 articles.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shi Yuexin. I'm a fourth-year archival science student from Wuhan University of China. I'm very honored to be here to join this conference. Today, the topic of my speech is Design and Implementation of Humanistic Service in Archives, centered on citizens' needs Chinese practice. The co-authors are Wang Yujue from Wuhan University and Guo Rohan from Renmin University of China. In this speech, I will base on the citizens' specific needs of using records and divided them into right needs, cultural needs, and emotional needs, because these three needs can best reflect the process of the growing citizens' needs and the gradual awakening of archives' people-centered service consciousness. In the rest of my speech, I'd like to introduce you how Chinese archives design and develop archival service centered on citizens' needs from these three dimensions. Firstly, right needs. In the past, the utilization rate of Chinese records was very low, and it was very difficult for the citizens to obtain records. With the awakening of people's right consciousness, the need to use records to protect their legal rights has increased greatly, including the right to learn the truth, the right of privacy, the right to make use of records, and so on. Faced with the right needs of citizens, many laws and regulations have been enacted to protect citizens' archival rights, such as regulations on the disclosure of government information and the Archives Law. Recently, the Archives Law is being amended, and the new Archives Law will focus more on the protection of the civil rights. Nowadays, the archives also actively provide citizens with archival consultation and personalized guidance, simplify the process of searching records, and greatly improve the utilization rate of records. The traditional way for people to obtain records is to go into the archives in person. Sometimes you have to go to many different archives to find what you want. Obviously, it's very inconvenient. Therefore, in order to facilitate citizens' access to records, Chinese archives have set up cross-regional and cross-archive service. The type of records available to citizens including marriage records, housing records, enterprise staff records, and so on. In 2018, Nanchang Archives developed an internet records sharing platform and uploaded more than 900,000 archival information from 9 city archives. This platform enabled people to obtain records they want in one place. Secondly, cultural needs. Traditional Chinese archives used to provide exhibitions as the only cultural service. However, citizens hope to get diverse archival cultural service. Therefore, archives have designed various services for citizens of different ages and tastes. For children, archives make picture books, organize archives restoration activities to enhance their interest in archives. For college students, archives set up practice spaces so that students can create their knowledge of archives in practice. For elderly, 11% of the population in China is elderly, and there are few cultural activities for them. But the archives have not forgotten them. Many Chinese archives hold activities such as playing old movies, collecting antiques, and old photographs to satisfy the elderly. For scientific researchers, the archives compile archival books, establish thematic database to make it easy for them to search relevant information. For the general public, the archives shoot microfilming, films, products, stationery, handicraft, and other archival cultural creative products, such as Qingdao Archives films, Searching for the Lost Memory, and other 2 microfilms. In the meantime, the archives spread archival, historical, and cultural knowledge on the social media. Among them, 90% of provincial public archives have set up WeChat accounts, and 323 public archives have set up Weibo accounts. Weibo is China's biggest Twitter-like microblogging platform. Archives of Jinshan District in Shanghai opened a WeChat account called Jinshan Memory and sent articles to the public through that. Now, single articles of Jinshan Memory can be read thousands of times and left hundreds of messages below it by readers. Finally, emotional needs. Through access to records, citizens hope to build collective memory and also gain emotional satisfaction and recognition of families, communities, and countries, which is the embodiment of deep emotional needs. In recent years, archives have paid attention to the emotional needs of more and more kinds of groups, such as urban residents and ethnic minorities. As for urban residents, up to 2017, 102 cities have carried out an urban memory project to preserve urban memories through computing records, holding exhibitions, and other forms. As for ethnic minorities, there are 56 nations in China. Many ethnic minorities are rare in population, and some even don't have their own language. Their history and culture are difficult to inherit and are on the verge of extinction. In recent days, ethnic minority records have received a lot of attention. The number of articles on ethnic minority records in 2018 has increased by 300% compared with 10 years ago. By 2017, Yunnan archives have completed the rescue and protection of 16 ethnic minority records through interviews with ethnic minority people and collecting of ethnic minority records. Among them, the Han-Yi ethnic minority has no writing system. The local public organized experts to record oral materials by means of script, audio, and video so as to promote the formation of Han-Yi ethnic minorities' oral record. In conclusion, from right needs, cultural needs to emotional needs, Chinese archives also always spare no efforts to meet the citizens' needs deeper and deeper. In the future, in order to meet the needs of citizens, Chinese archives will also accomplish the following aspects. Chinese archives institution will adjust the organizational framework, and the administrative functions will be assigned to archives administrations so that archives can focus more on the cultural functions. The archivists will be trained to enhance their awareness and ability of serving the public. Also, archives will pay more attention to the application of new technologies such as GIS, VR, and provide more and more high-quality service for citizens. That's all. Thank you for your attention.